Welcome to Pan-African Lifestyle, the ultimate Pan-African home. I am your host, Harrison Paul, and we post here regularly. So please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, as we would not want you to miss a thing. If you're a PAL, which is short for Pan-African Lifestyler, welcome back to the tribe.
Living a dream, living the African dream.
And finally, the moment we've all been waiting for. Welcome to the Pan-African Hub, where we spotlight the movers and shakers of the Pan-African movement. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking to John DeBellotte, founder of Diaspora Freedom Initiative and an expert in legacy and trust planning. Welcome, John, to the Pan-African Hub. How are you, brother?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good, man. I'm very, very good. You know, you always got to have so much respect for a brother who's moved himself to the continent and taken that risk, because, you know, a lot of us want to talk like we Pan-Africanists from the heart, but you've done it live. So just from the right off bat, my respect is high when I hear an African-American accent, and then I hear a brother who's, you know, put his money where his mouth is. So
That's it. You had to take the leap.
Man, please just tell us by telling us about your journey and what really led you to establish Diaspora Freedom Initiative and Biopic Investment Group.
Yeah. So what ended up happening with Diaspora Freedom Initiative came first, and what we were doing there was we were really studying how minorities in the United States got ahead, right? Some minority groups are way further ahead than others, even though they maybe arrived in the United States at a later time. And so what we saw was that there were a couple factors that led to political empowerment and empowerment as, you know, a minority group. One of those factors was having an economic hub. And so there had to be this place where members of that minority group could have economic activity amongst each other and be able to do business with people who are not members of that group, right? So we have places like Little Italy, Koreatown, Chinatown. There are Southie Boston for these like Irish areas, Jewish community centers. So all of these groups, they have their place. Little Tijuana, all that stuff. And so initially, the knee-jerk reaction was, oh yeah, but every time we do that, the government burns it down, right? But then in the research, we found that like LA Chinatown was burnt down like 4 times, right? So what's the difference? How come their stuff got burnt down just like our stuff got burnt down? But in the end, it got to a place where everything ended up working out for them, right? And so what we realized was that difference is they connected their their economic activity to a foreign country's GDP. And it didn't matter how powerful the country was, right? Like Little Havana worked because they connected their economic activity to Cuba, which was under US embargo. The exception to the embargo was people who came from there could still do business there and import and export out of there, right? And so that country had no power whatsoever. They didn't have military might to stand against the United States or to bully the United States or to pressure them or anything like that. The key simply was connecting your economic activity to a foreign GDP. That's all it took. And every group that did that succeeded. So we kept building these places, Black Wall Street, and all the way up to the Move, in Philly and all that. We kept creating these places that were not connected to anything, that were not connected to a foreign GDP and a foreign economic center. And so they just burned it down. They didn't care. And nobody picked up the phone and called the State Department and said, hey, you just affected our GDP by 2 points. What's going on over there? Right. And so we were like, all right, excellent. That's the way it works. Right. Like we looked into it. We checked out every single group. We saw how they did it. Every single group did it exactly the same way. Every single group had their stuff burnt down until they did this. And as soon as they did this, they succeeded. Right. And the Asians were particularly interesting because they voted the least. When we were doing our due diligence, they were the minority group that voted the least, yet they had almost the most political power. Right. I think we all know which group has the most political power, right? But they're number 2. And so when you go to Chinatown, every street in the Chinatown is written in Chinese, right? The street sign, the government street sign is written in Chinese and it's written in English, right? But they don't vote. Like, which politician was like, oh yeah, we should write their street names in Chinese everywhere they are, right? And so that economic currency is what gives them their political clout and their political power. So one thing that's more powerful than voting is political action committees, right? And super political action committees. So super PACs and PACs is where it's at, right? And so that's what we saw. And then we started looking at the numbers. And at the time when we were doing our due diligence, it was of all the Black-owned businesses that existed, at the time, the numbers were 0.86% of them were in production and manufacturing, right? So we didn't produce anything, we didn't manufacture anything. All we did was retail stuff. And so we said, okay, we're going to create an organization that helps empower, folks in our community to be able to get into business, start manufacturing, start production, and connect that to a foreign GDP. Some, African country, Caribbean country, whatever, but some Black country that has a vested interest in what, our community is doing, and to start up that Chinatown, cycle for us. And so we started, pushing that. And it was difficult. People rejected it. People pushed back against it. Unfortunately, it's really, really hard to get that vision going. And then we had a client, an older woman who's since passed on, but she had a place in Detroit. And at that place, she sold like corporate awards. So like, Employee of the Month, and then like the T-shirts when the whole corporation goes to Disney World or Six Flags or Dorney Park or whatever, and they all got their T-shirt on that says they work for XYZ Incorporated, right? And then, Park Day 2027, whatever. She made those shirts. And so her daughter, or her granddaughter ended up being killed by police. And the chief of police, and those of you guys who are old enough in Detroit probably recognize this story. The chief of police was immediate, like, nah, that was a bad shoot. He needs to be fired. He needs to be prosecuted, the whole nine. Well, the union was like, he pays his union dues. So we're going to protect him because that's what we do. So we're going to fight for him. We're going to fight for his job and all that. So while she's in this process, she finds out that the company she buys the blank T-shirts from is the #1 donor to the police. So her Black-owned business that has to buy T-shirts from a non-Black business before she sells a single thing, right? So it's really a Black-owned front for a white-owned industry. Right. All of those Black dollars are actually going to defend her granddaughter's murder.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was the first one. She was the first one that was like, yep, all my T-shirts now come from Africa. Build the factory for me. I don't care what it costs. She was super motivated, like, get it done. And so she was the first one. And so she, set up that, it was really a cotton loom. It was super effective. The tariffs really meant nothing to the landed costs. I think her things were coming in. Her shirts were coming in landed. Oh man, this was so long ago, but I want to say they were coming in landed at $1.25 after tariff for the T-shirts made by one bale of cotton, which is in the thousands, right? I can't think of it off the top of my head, but if you Google it, it's over 1,000 T-shirts that you can make with one bale of cotton. So one bale of cotton T-shirts that were made from that, after she got good with her, the first couple of batches. There's a what do they call it? There's like a differential for damage and defect, right? And so what you want to do is you want to get that down to where it's 10%. So it's 5% on this side, 5% on that side, and then you got manufacturing going. But you got to work on that. You got to get there. So her first like 3 or 4 batches, it was like 25% damage. You can't have that. That's going to mess you up. So then when she got down to 10%, she was good. But she did that in 3 months. It didn't take long. And it was only $658 per bale of cotton. So that didn't take long at all either. And at the time, the mean income in the country, I want to say the mean income at that time was something like 12,500 Kenyan shillings per month, which was at that time, because it was 100 to 1 back then. So it was like $125 a month per employee. And you were paying them a mean. So you weren't like paying them the minimum wage. You were paying them what like a bank manager makes. You were paying them smack dab in the middle. Right? So they were middle class immediately at that $125 a month. So it was a really interesting kind of experiment because it was our first one. And then up until then, we were, helping people get grants, and we were writing grants for people, and we were writing government contracts, and we were just trying to get money into our people's hands. Because initially, when we had started, the complaint was always, I don't have the money, I don't have the capital, I don't have the money, I don't have the capital. And we believed them because we were new, right? And we were like, all right, fine. It's money and capital is the problem. Let's get the money in the capital. And then we found out very quickly that that wasn't the problem at all. It was all mindset. So after we started getting money into people's hands, because we took it so far that we got to the point where we were writing the grants for them and writing the government contracts for them. So now they start winning, right? Because initially, we're like, all right, well, here's the information. Here's how you get into SAM. Here's how you get signed up while, with all your numbers and blah, 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 your cage code and all of those things that they needed back then. And then they wouldn't do it. Well, I don't know how to search. Well, I don't know the language. Well, my vocabulary, I don't know how to write. I never went to college. So then we just got to the point where we did everything for them, literally. And then they started winning awards and they started getting the money, and then they still. So we're like, wait a minute.
Wow.
The money's not the issue. The money's
right.
It's the mindset. The mindset's the issue. And so then we had to shift gears. And then we really started focusing on that manufacturing and production. So we really started focusing on, all right, what can we do, out of Africa to make sure that we're not just the last cog on a non-Black, industry that in blackface, for all intents and purposes. So we're sitting there saying Black-owned business, but before we even make a dollar, we have to pay a non-Black industry to even get the stock to have the business, right? So we're like, all right, how do we create this Chinatown cycle and and start going from there? So that was it. That was the beginning of this journey.
No, this is amazing, and that's one of the things that I know that Malcolm X spoke in one of his interviews. Have you seen that before? He said about until the Black man is respected on the continent, he'll never truly be respected in America. And that's something that also Dr. Umar has touched on a lot. And I guess it brings us right back to where we start. And oftentimes I speak to people, and I started off by fighting racism, initially my awakening. And when you start off fighting racism, you realize you have to strip it right back to understanding the fight the fight on the continent, between the West and the continent, and it's really understanding where it all went wrong and how you're going to truly gain your power back. So it's really fascinating that you guys started there. Is that where you believe your Pan-African journey started? Or obviously years before that it started, where you or were you always that kind of a person, even growing up from a young age?
I think it was just part of how the household operated. I think traveling, if you're a parent, you got a young kid right now, and you're trying to figure out how to open their eyes to how small the world is, just take them somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
If it's the cheapest ticket you can find, just travel with that person. We traveled a lot, as a child, because my father was from Grenada. So we'd go to Grenada, we'd go to St. Lucia, we go to all these places. So to me, there were all these places all over the world, and these countries where Black people were in charge, and I had seen them, you know what I mean?
Right.
With my own eyes, and so to me, it was just always possible. Whereas we had spoken to people, in consultations and stuff, and they're like, oh, they won't let us do that. They won't let us do what? Well, they won't let us build that business. Who won't let us build that business? I'm talking about a country where the government's black. Who are you talking about? Who won't let us
Right.
build the business?
Right.
And because they've never seen anything outside of, their neighborhood, they couldn't conceive of a place in the world where black folks ran stuff,
Right.
And so
Right.
that, I think that was something, whether it was intentional or not, I think that always just, I had essentially that Pan-African kind of mindset from the jump, because I just knew it was possible. I didn't have to believe in anything. Like, it was just, oh yeah, I can go over there and, the president's going to be black. I can go over there and all the businesses are going to be owned by black people, or at least there's going to be a black ownership representation in each industry, right? And so that's what allowed me to believe that black people could own more than churches. Because if all you've done is come up, where I came up, the only thing that black people owned were funeral homes and churches, and the funeral home was normally part of the church. So that was it. Even the liquor store and the gun store in the hood where I came up at was owned by Italians. You know what I mean? The liquor store wasn't even owned by black folks. So that was it. No grocery store ever owned by black folks. So when you go in for these things that you need to live, right? You need food to live. You got to go to the grocery. You got to buy food. At least the way we operate in the West. You got to have clothes on your back. You got to go into the clothing store. Every time you go somewhere that you needed something to live, there'd be somebody following you around, seeing if you were trying to steal in your own neighborhood. You know what I mean? So that's all. So I get it. Like, that's all they've ever seen. Their people didn't take them nowhere except for maybe the next county over. And so there's folks that I came up with that have never left Berks County, Pennsylvania. Right. There's, when I moved to Philly, there's people that I know in Philly have never left Philadelphia County, Philadelphia. They didn't even go to Atlantic City. They haven't crossed the bridge or gone to New Jersey and gone down to Atlantic City. Right. So there's a lot of folks in the U.S. that, that county they were born in, that's what they know. And that's the world to them. The whole world operates that way. What they know from that county, that's the way the world works. So it's tough sometimes.
It's funny you say that, brother, because one of the things that I traveled to America and I tried to live there. I went to LA, went to Texas first, then I went to LA. I was trying to make the big move, the big LA move. Yeah, I can see you're laughing already. You know what that's like. And as so cliche, I slept in the car to try to make it happen for a couple of days. Boy, if I tell you, waking up with the LA heat hitting you through a car window, I was like, this ain't gonna work. But anyway, it was character building. But the point was, was fortunate because, that becomes an epicenter for success to some degree. And I got to meet different black people from all sorts from different states. And you're saying here how you went around and you got to see black people in power and black people running things. And I got to meet black people who were, I want to say, strong-willed, who had an amazing sense of self-determination. Despite you not having that, that's one of the things, if you think about it, man, that's why every great, Pan-African movement started in America, really. That's not taking away credit to other places in Africa, whatever they have. Yeah. But you guys have always been the leading, of course, Malcolm X, Martin Luther. We can go on, the big names and whatever, Marcus Garvey, all this stuff really starts there. So I believe there is an aroma that lives on the streets of America that gets passed down generation after generation of, like, the Panthers, the air that the Panther left. They left that for this generation, and you can feel it amongst black people once you get there, right? And as a colonized mind, an African boy, an immigrant, it was completely brand new to me. So this is why I always advocate for this unity in regards to African Americans, and then of course the diasporans, Africans who immigrants, if I can say. Because there's something that we can both offer to each other. I'd never seen a sense of strength and self-determination and I want to say aggressive confidence. You know what I mean? In the face of white supremacy. I've never seen that up close like the way I saw it. A black boldness, and when we compare that with the stuff that you're saying, you know, going to the Africa and seeing certain things that will benefit African Americans, that marrying the two is going to really what's going to make this revolution so powerful. That's why it is amazing to hear
Absolutely.
African Americans like yourself who are there and say, okay, I see the resources, I see the opportunity, I see the space. Let's show you what we were doing with less. You know what I mean? On the streets of America. Do you know that kind of way? So it's just really powerful, and I love to see it, man. So, man, it's really eye opening. But you know, your expertise focuses on, you know, offshore trust and company formation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As well as generational wealth and
Absolutely.
planning. How can the African diaspora benefit from these services, and why is it so important for the diaspora to focus on legacy building?
Yeah. So we found out, to our delight, that when it comes to generational wealth, the money is the easy part, right? And what ends up happening for us particularly is we conflate our personal career paths and our personal entrepreneurship paths and plans with our generational wealth plan. And so with generational wealth, money compounds, and you just got to be, you know, this smart with it. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot, and money will compound on its own. The issue is when we try to become successful and we say, okay, I'm gonna believe in myself, right? And I'm gonna do this thing and I'm gonna be successful. And then after I'm successful, I'm going to leave it to my family, right? Then my kids are going to inherit my success, and right? And as we look and study, and I'm a huge kind of look at the things that worked in history type of guy, if you haven't picked up on that. But as we look at
Oh
what
yeah,
has worked, you know, for the families with generational wealth, the first person always dies poor. That's not the way it works. They don't become a success and typically pass everything on to the next generation, right? The great kind of dynasties, whether they were morally great or not, but the great dynasties in generational wealth, when you're looking at, you know, Rockefellers and Kennedys and Rothschilds and, you know, DuPonts and all of these types of people, that very first one is always poor, dies poor.
right.
And he makes just the smallest amount of headway
Mm,
to get, you know, that you know, whether it's the Rothschilds and that one kid can get into the banking world and get an
right,
education, where the father was a cobbler who couldn't read, right? Or whether it's the Kennedys, where they're
right.
actually essentially, you know, that first generation is a potato farmer, and then the next generation is actually a drug dealer, right? He's
Mm,
bootlegging illegal booze across the Canadian
mm,
border during Prohibition when alcohol was an illegal drug. Right? So they're drug
mm.
dealers at that point.
Mm-hmm,
Two
mm-hmm,
generations later,
mm-hmm.
they're the president of the United States, right? And so
Wow.
money compounds. And if you can put money away and let it compound at a rate higher than inflation, it will simply grow, right?
Mm,
That's ridiculously easy. Here in Kenya, we had an infrastructure bond. It was a 20-year government bond, right? It had an ROI of 18.46%. I want you guys to Google that. The Kenyan tax exempt infrastructure bond. Now there are multiple, and you can still get a tax exempt infrastructure bond, and now they do about 14%. 14% is still 4 points higher than the S&P 500. All right, S&P 500 historically grows at a rate of about 10% a year. Right, so you're getting 14% on a government bond. Right, Treasury bonds are like safe bets. They're at the safest side of the spectrum of investment. Right, and then your blue chips and your speculation and all of that are, you know, your crazy bets. They're on the other side. So government bonds are considered safe by essentially everybody. Right, so you have a government bond that's tax exempt. If you understand how the U.S. tax code works, right? If you're making money overseas and you are overseas, and there's some other caveats to this that, you know, I won't get into. I'll refer you to your CPA on, but you can file a form called Form 2555, IRS Form 2555, and if you qualify under Form 2555, $130,000 of foreign earned income is tax exempt.
wow.
So you got a tax exempt bond, and you have an instrument in in the tax code that makes the income that you're gaining overseas tax exempt, right? And there's some
Wow.
caveats to that. Again, I refer you to your CPA to see if you qualify, but that exists, right? So there's something that's referred to as a DRIP, which stands for Dividend Reinvestment Program, right? And so if your DRIP is 100%, and what that means is that every year when you get that 18.46% off of this bond, you reinvest it, right? You don't keep it, you don't take it out, you don't buy Jordans, you don't get a new car, you do
Right.
reinvest it, right? And so if that's all you're doing, that growth is going to compound every year, right? And so what we've done with our clients is we'll bring them in, and with the generational wealth trust, we'll put that trust offshore for them, and that trust holds whatever investment they're trying to do, and it's designed to do whatever it is that they want it to do. But the trust has to be for real. There's a lot of BS trust work out there where the trust as an instrument, yes, trust exists, so that's always factual, but the way they utilize it ends up being not just, nonsensical, but typically illegal, right? And so what ends up happening is with this generational wealth trust, the trustee is a corporation that you do not own. It's not a sham corporation. You create a corporation just to say no. It's a real trustee company. It's a real trustee corporation that you do not have any shares in. You do not own it. You can't do anything with it, right? You build the trust deed, so the company can only do what's in that document. That document governs the trust. That's all trust, right? So you've already come up with the trust deed, with the legal team and all of that. The trust is then formed. The trust is then settled, or in U.S. language, it's granted. Whatever you grant into the trust, here we call it settling into the trust. And now the trust is funded, which is where the trust fund comes from. So now the trust is funded, and there's a trust fund, right? And then that company is managing that trust fund. You are not the trustee. You are not the beneficiary. If you were, it would be what's called a grantor trust, and the tax implications of that are horrific, right? So you can no longer touch what's in this trust, and you didn't put anything in it. Because you didn't put anything in it, and you cannot touch it, it is a legitimate non-grantor trust, and there's no tax form that you have to file. You didn't put anything in it. Nothing from America went into that trust, ever, right? Now, your kids or your grandkids are the beneficiaries of the trust, and they might be American, and as soon as the trust makes a distribution to them, there might be a tax implication to them. But until that point, that non-grantor trust is responsible for its own taxes, and they will make whatever filing that they need to make if a filing is necessary. Now, in the country where we set up these trusts, there are reasons that we choose those countries. So, for example, in Kenya, where we set up our generational wealth trust, you can get 10 million in distributions out of that trust tax exempt per beneficiary in the local currency. 10 million in the local currency is less than 130,000, which goes back to that IRS form 2555. 130,000 is tax exempt if the source, is a foreign source. And again, there are some other components to that. So right off the bat, there's the distribution limit that's tax exempt from the trust when your beneficiaries are ready to start getting distributions is lower than the tax exempt limit in the IRS code, right? So right away, that entire amount of money is potentially tax exempt 100% legally, right? Over the time that it takes for your grandkids to become of age, you could have put $1,000 in that trust one time, right? And it's an indirect process. Like I said, you don't physically put anything from the United States into that trust. But there can be $1,000 in that trust, and that's all that goes in there. You never put another dime in there. That $1,000 will still compound over 60 years and still make it to six figures. You might make it to seven. Right? So compounding, that's why the money's easy. The reason why we typically don't get it is because we touch it. We dibble in it. We dabble in it. We pull some out because there's a medical bill. We pull some out because we need a new car. We got to get to work. And what are we going to do if we don't get to work? And we make all the excuses in the world to keep touching the money. right? And that's what messes up the generational wealth. If you throw the money in there, you let it compound, you forget about it for the next 60 years, you're good. So that's the easy part. The hard part is that mindset. Like I said originally, we
Right,
found out
right,
really quick
right.
that money wasn't the problem in the first place. So if you don't create a program by which you impart financial literacy and the right mindset to the next generation and the generation after that, then there's a 75% chance statistically that they're going to blow that money as soon as that money comes into their hands, right? So the generational wealth won't continue. We typically use a family constitution framework for that, right? And so within the family constitution, the family sits down and decides what they want their family to be about. And they draft the document, just like the U.S. Constitution, articles and all of that, right? They draft the document. They have a motto. They may have a coat of arms. If they do have a coat of arms, that coat of arms will be registered in Africa, in an African college of arms, right? Where that and it'll be official. They'll have their, they'll have a grant of arms that's signed by the College of Arms registrar and the officials for whatever government that it's registered in. So it's an official, legitimate coat of arms. It has heraldic language, and if you know how to, and your family, of course, would learn that and understand how to decipher a coat of arms and how it works and blah, 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 blah. But beyond just the symbols, you also need traditions, right? So if that tradition is Thanksgiving or, whatever those traditions are, those traditions need to be set in stone, and it needs to be stuff that can't be changed. It can be improved upon, but it can't be changed.
Right.
We play fast and loose. So what happens with us typically is Big Mama dies and then it's over because there's nobody holding it together and there's nobody who remembers the traditions anymore. And that was the last family reunion before Big Mama died, right? Because there's no family constitution that people can look at and be like, okay, maybe Big Mama ain't here, but on the 27th day of June every year, we're supposed to have a family meeting. And that family meeting doubles as the family reunion. And and this is the format of the meeting, and this is the business of the family. This is how we handle investment. You know what I mean? So that has to happen to create the framework to make the generational wealth actually last. But when I say the money part is the easy part, I've had people that went to whatever the party street, the main street, whatever it's called in your city. They went there every weekend, went in the dumpsters behind the bars, opened the dumpsters up and pulled out the Bud Light cans and the Guinness cans, crushed them and threw them in a trash bag, and went and to the recycling plant and took the coins that they got from the recycling and started their generational wealth.
Whoa.
So if you want it, you can do it. But it's not going to benefit you. It is generational wealth, not personal wealth. All right. It's going to benefit the next generation or the generation after that. The smaller the amount of money, the further out you got to push the beneficiary. Right. So if you want to start with $100, you can, but then your beneficiary should probably be your great grandkids. Right. We just had a couple come in. They don't have children yet. They gave it 60 years. So they said by the time, their kids come of age, they expect their kids to be mid-20s or whatever. And then by the time those kids come of age, the same type of thing. So they're looking at 30 years and 30 years. They don't have any kids yet, mind you. They used the last Kenyan infrastructure bond, which guaranteed 15%. They did the math. They put in $3,300, right? And in the 60 years, that $3,300 is going to be like 2-point-something million.
Wow.
So the money's easy. They just don't have to worry about that tax return money anymore. They took one tax return, each, threw it in there, one sacrifice once in their life, done. They don't have to touch it again. Now, obviously, if you discipline yourself and make monthly payments and all of that stuff, you can do more. There's a slight tax implication to that because now you have to report to the IRS that you made a payment into a foreign trust. All right, fine. But if you do monthly, payments into that, you're going to make it happen a lot faster, right? And you can see that all over the place where the people say, okay, if you have a baby and then you open up a Roth IRA, and you put in $100 a month, and when the baby is 59 and a half, there's going to be $2.9 million. And it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. except you're focused on generational wealth. And the trust, the reason that the trust exists, because yes, you can do it with a Roth IRA. Yes, you can do it with a high yield savings account. Yes, you can do it with your mattress, right? But the problem becomes is those things are not protected. You got a house fire, the mattress is gone, right? And you're not getting interest on the mattress. But so that's the least protected way, right? But with the Roth IRAs and the high interest accounts and all of that stuff, there are situations that could put those accounts up for grabs, right? So you could be in a car accident, you can get divorced, and your spouse will be like, oh, the money that you used to do that was marital, assets, and so and you can get in all these issues, right? If it goes where you want it to go, and now your time is done, and now it's your kids' time, and that money is for your kids, and they have a great lifestyle because you provided something for them, and somebody sees that, and they marry them, and 6 months later they divorce them. Now they want half of that great lifestyle they saw, right? All that's unprotected. So the purpose of the trust is to protect it from everything. And depending on how you design that trust, it can literally be protected from everything. So we've been doing this, like I said, a little over a decade. We've had situations where stuff comes up. We've had situations where somebody married a beneficiary and then divorced them a year later and then tried to base child support off of the lifestyle they had. But that lifestyle was provided by the company that was owned by the trust that they had been an employee of since they were 16 years old. And they had minimum wage in that company since they were 16 years old. That was part of the trust deed and how their parents had set up that trust to work. So what ended up happening was, now you're 26. It's been 10 years that you've been getting minimum wage from this, offshore corporation that's owned by your offshore trust. And there are corporate perks. One of the corporate perks is a house. One of the corporate perks is use of the company car, and all this stuff. So you got this person looking around like, I like this lifestyle. They marry you under false pretenses, and they're with you for a year. They decide, I'm done. And this is all marital property. I'll take half the car. I'll take half the house. I'll take half the whatever. Oh, and by the way, I had a baby in that 1 year, so I want that child support. Let's run it up. And then they come back to find out the house was never owned by you. And it's not that you moved it right before you got married, because that's a problem, right? A judge will get into that. No. It's been like this for 10 years, 9 years before I met, them. It's been like this. I've been getting paid this wage for the last 10 years. So my child support is $50 a month, right? And the end of that case, they got nothing, and they gave him the child. They didn't even want it. They gave him the child and walked away because they weren't down for having $50 a month. Wow. And the trust did that from just parents that had the foresight 10, 11 years ago to set it up that way. But he still has a lifestyle. He can't burn it all because there's spendthrift clauses in the trust, and the trustee, provides what's necessary. But on paper, he's real poor. So any kind of income-based situation in a judgment is going to be super low, like in child support. It's like $55 a month. She was appalled. She handed over that baby so fast and was just like, forget it. I'm not interested anymore. And so it was really interesting how that thing came to fruition and really saved his butt. And then within a month, he was creating a trust, his own, what we call an appendant trust. So he created an additional trust, he saw how that thing protected him. So that's why we use the offshore trust, because our stuff used to get burnt down. What we were talking about earlier, right? Because Black Wall Street used to get burnt down. So we put our stuff offshore in a protective mechanism that can't nobody touch it, even if you're wrong. If you go out drunk driving and you hit somebody with your car while you're drunk driving and they win the judgment, and rightfully so, they can't take what you put in that trust.
Wow.
What you left for the next generation is secure. So that's why we use the trust. But if the trust is something that is out of reach right now, we always tell people, just do it. Do it in a high yield saving account. Do it. It's not protected like it would be in the trust. Just do it. Just get it started. And and then when you're at a certain level, turn around and protect it. But for now, just get it started. The key thing though with the trust is that the trust has to be in play long before anything goes wrong. You cannot react to a bad situation with the trust.
one of the main points you mentioned there, and I'm hearing, is mindset,
Yeah.
which is a major, major thing. And one of the quotes that I love, I forget where I heard it, but it said, basically to the effect of poverty breeds short-sightedness, you know?
Hmm.
And, you know, the system, I can say, has you in a state where you can't think further than the end of the month, you know,
Yep.
and you're constantly in that state. And of course, even black people, it's funny you say this. This may sound very minimal. This may sound like nothing, but I'm actually going to throw it out here because I actually realized, wow, this happened today for a reason. It's funny that I have you on here today. But today I bought my first bulk in meat and chicken, right? Sounds silly, but what made me think about it was a friend of mine, not a friend of mine. I actually do some personal training on the side. I'm a personal trainer. So one of my clients was telling me, oh no, he buys in bulk. And now, of course, this guy is a guy who he's got enough in enough in his pocket to spend like about £300 for a month for just
Yeah.
personal training. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just that moment where he kind of that short-sightedness, he passed it over. Now I know a lot of people, African people, do buy in bulk, but I
Mhm.
guess it was just a moment personally for me, and especially basically what I'm saying is there are a lot of habits within the black community that have been built from our, I guess, the background. You know what I mean? Whether it be financial background, whether it be never having anything. I think one of even the biggest debate and questions is about romance between black men and black women. It's like all black women always want black men to have it all together before they marry them. And me and
Mhm.
my fiance always have this conversation. It's like, well, a lot of black women are coming from struggle. They watch their mom struggle as a single parent home, and
Right.
they're trying to be the one that actually goes further. Whereas you
Right.
might have a white woman who didn't come from that same distress of lack in the home, of like, we're not gonna lack again, you know, that kind of way. So that
Yeah.
mindset really affects us and how we move forward and the courage in which
Yeah.
we take and certain things like that. You know what I mean? So I really do enjoy your stress on mindset, which makes me ask you, you know, what advice do you have for people as someone who has a deep understanding of international relocation and asset protection? What advice do you give to, you know, people who want to relocate back to Africa and secure their wealth for the future?
Yeah, definitely. I always say look for the country that aligns specifically with you. Like we have an immigration law firm and we only immigrate people to Kenya, right? So it would be real easy for me to be like, oh, Kenya the best, Kenya the place, go hit me up. I'm a real hit you to Kenya, right? And there are aspects, you know, in that that's true. But there are other African countries that specialize in specific things. And so the first question that you have to answer is, what are you going to do? And there doesn't have to be a grandiose answer to that either. We got this thing in our community where everything has to be grandiose and you're not allowed to copy anything. Like where I come from, they call it bite. You can't, don't bite off of me, you know, but there's a word for it in
Yeah.
every territory, you know, where don't copy me, you know. And so, which is ridiculous because that's what business is. You copy the best ideas, and it's why our businesses don't take off the way they should. And so, the answer to that question could be nothing. That when I move to Africa, I am going to sit on a beach and not do anything, and enjoy what time I have left, and that is the plan. Okay, fine. You know, then any beach will do, right? But if you know, like for instance, we want to create a hospital that focuses in maternity to answer the struggle of black women dying at a 3.5 times the rate you know, in maternity in the United States,
Right,
and
right, right.
similar rates. I think it's actually 4 times the rate in the UK, right? So
Yes, it is. Yeah.
that's something that we eventually want to tackle, right? So, okay, if that's the goal and we want to tackle that, then we need a place where medicine is on par because now we're asking, you know, black women to fly somewhere and you know you can't get on a plane past a certain point. So now we're asking you to fly somewhere 3 months before you give birth and stay with us all 3 months, you know, in this medical facility and then we're going to guarantee that you have a superior medical, experience than you would have had, in your home country, right? So that means that the medical infrastructure needs to be on point. That means that the medicines available need to be on point. That means that the doctor's knowledge needs to be on point. That means that the RNs need to be on point. And so in that scenario, when you look at East Africa in particularly, there's only one country where a nurse can take their NCLEX, submit their results to the Board of Nursing, and actually get a nursing license just like that. It's the same thing as an American RN or LPN, right? And that country is Kenya. Ugandan nurses cannot do that. Rwandan nurses cannot do that. Tanzanian nurses cannot do that. Only Kenyan nurses have the nursing education level to just simply apply and get a Board of Nursing approval in the United States and then jump on a plane and be a nurse in the United States, right? So that shows us, all right, Kenya is a place that we want to look at if we're trying to do this medical thing, and move on from there. There are places like in South Africa, IP law is incredible in South Africa. If you're going to have an IP firm, if you're going to be working with copyrights, if you're going to be working with trademarks, and that's going to be your business, then maybe South Africa is better for you than Kenya, right? Because that government and the structures in that government are set up for that thing. So after you figure out what it is you want to do, then you need to figure out which government is going to assist you in doing it, or at least not stand in your way. You don't want to do a DNA test and then talk about I don't know, my people are Fulani from modern day Ghana, so I'm going to go to Ghana, right? That makes absolutely no sense. Because in a lot of those situations, like a matter of fact, I'll give you mine. I did the DNA test, and I did a haplogroup test, right? That tells you your tribe and all of that stuff, right? So the haplogroup test came back and said you have a 100% match to the Balanta that live in modern day Guinea-Bissau, right? So then I go check out the Balanta tribe. Turns out the Balanta tribe come from the border of what is currently Egypt and Sudan, what would have been Kush back in the day, and they just happened to be in Guinea-Bissau when the Berlin Conference happened because they were nomadic people. So now I'm going to take the results of this test, go to a country that doesn't have the infrastructure to do what I want to do business-wise, just because some test said that, the remnants of my people are currently in that country that was made up by Europeans, right? And then when I go and actually research those people, they were from over on this side. So if that was what I wanted to do, to be true to the land where that bloodline came from, I wouldn't come here. I'd go to Sudan, or I'd go to, Egypt and that region. So it's one of those things where it's like, even when you get that result should not be dictating anything. Because as you start digging into these people, you're probably going to find out that they came from somewhere else completely, right? They just happen to be in that location when they carved up Africa, you know what I mean, and decided this place is going to be called Nigeria and that place is going to be called, Kenya, right? So you need to find the modern day government that's doing what you need done, and then make your way over there. If you do that, the place you go will help you succeed. If you don't, if you're just like, oh, child, Ghana said, come home, I'm going to Ghana, right? You might get to Ghana and find out Ghana ain't got nothing for you. And then you see all the people on YouTube complaining about, like, oh, we came, they told us to come, but then when we got here, there was nothing ready for us. There was no infrastructure for it. That's because you did absolutely no due diligence. You would have known there was no infrastructure for what you wanted to do. It's not that there's no infrastructure. People live there.
Right. Yeah.
There's not an infrastructure for what you wanted to do. So when you got there and you tried to do it, it didn't work because you did no due diligence and you didn't look into that infrastructure. So every intentional move that you make needs to be based on the outcome that you wish to have. That's how mindset starts changing, because you'll start training your mind to look for the things that help you get to the outcome. Right. And then as you start doing that, you'll start seeing opportunities in everything. Right. When Trump threw the tariff out there, I immediately was like, thank you for that tariff. We have AGOA. AGOA is a congressional act that you can't eliminate with an executive order, which makes certain African countries, Kenya being one of them, exempt from all tariffs. Thank you for making it so that no one can compete with us. Black people are about to win. And all it takes was black people to step in there and start pushing their products through those AGOA countries, and they would have beat everybody because everybody else got to pay at least a 10% tariff. It's that quick. Instead, people, oh, Trump crazy, Trump hate black people, Trump. And I might agree with all of those things. But you train your mind to see the solution and the way out instead of focusing on the problems. And the only way to do that is to know what winning looks like. If you don't know what winning looks like, you can't do it. It's not even possible. You have to know what the win looks like in order to train your mind to see everything that'll get you to the win. And that's how you change mindset. Yeah, and it takes at least 30 days.
Wow. I really love that, man. Especially, this is why I do believe that, I've never been a believer in kind of sticking with the borders that were given to us and identifying with those borders that were given to us. I just never did. I quite like the vagueness of African American. I like that you belong to the whole continent.
Yeah.
You know, because even in that we tend to divide ourselves and say, you stick to your own, you stick to your own, you don't come to my land when you come to my land, and then we're treating each other like how Europeans treat each other. So we're taking westernized culture with us to Europe. And I don't know, maybe it's fairy tale, but I like to believe that we were one big family sharing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how I like to believe it. And that's what will, in turn, you know, not make people feel that they can't just make, you know, Kenya the home, despite maybe ancestry saying they're from Ghana or whatever it may be. And I think that's what, you know, any true Pan-Africanist wanted from the beginning. Really, it's for us to behave as one unit. But that's really, really awesome how you've kind of worked that out, man. I wanted to ask you, what are some common challenges you encounter when helping businesses from the diaspora expand into African markets? And how do you work to overcome them?
Right, yeah, sure. So the number one issue is goodwill. As crazy as that sounds,
I've heard this one a lot of time.
Yeah, that has been the number one problem. We did it ourselves, right? And so when we first had the first enterprise that we got going, we paid those people like more than they would have got paid in America. Like we were like, we're gonna do right by them. Let's do this. We almost destroyed that entire region, right? We created a hyperinflation bubble. And it was interesting because they told me a story I had heard before, right? The elders, when they came to me, were like, you got to stop this. They told me a story I had heard before, and I had never heard it the way they told it, right? And so they said, hey, listen, you know, there was an African king a long time ago from the West called Mansa Musa. Like, man, I know about Mansa Musa, the richest man ever lived. I know Mansa Musa. They're like, that's awesome. He went on a pilgrimage to Mecca. And on his way, he threw gold everywhere. And he destroyed the Egyptian economy for, you know, the most conservative estimate is 3 years, right? Some scholars say he destroyed the Egyptian economy and the regional economy for 15 years.
Wow.
Right? But completely destroyed their economy by giving the people free gold. It's like, that's what you're doing to this economy right now. You're destroying our economy. You're creating hyperinflation bubbles. You're creating situations where all the landlords want your employees to rent from them because they got more money now, and the price is going up on that rent, and, you know, and all of that, right? And this is a place where you can't gentrify by building nice houses because there's no property tax. So you can't create a property tax situation for the person next door just because you built a mansion and now your mansion is worth 10 times more than, you know, their house. That doesn't do anything because they're not paying property taxes, right? So the only way that you can create a similar situation is by overpaying. So we had to take a step back. We had to figure out, you know, all right, how do we actually do this thing? And that's where we started coming in and saying, okay, you need to start paying, you know, the mean, right? And because we don't want like average, you know, to average it out, because what ends up happening when you're looking at like the average, then what ends up happening is if you have, let's say you're doing an average of 5, right? So when you average, you add them up and you divide by the number, right? So if you're doing an average of 5, first person is worth $1, second person $1, third person $1, fourth person $1. This guy 20 billion, right? Now you do that division and it makes it seem like your middle ground is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 billion, right? The person in the middle is 10 billion, but no, this guy got all 20 billion and these guys all got $1. And when you do that averaging, it's all skewed, right? So you want to actually find the number that's actually in the middle and say, okay, that's actually the number in the middle. That's what we're going to do. And we found that that has the lowest impact. To the side of that, you want to like at least for us, we always preach that you want to respect the locals and the local economy and the locals' ability to control their own destiny, right? And so the way that we tried to do that was we created in our bylaws for any companies that we operate. In our bylaws, there is a clause that would give shares or ownership to the employees. And then we work with a local CPA and we figure out about 5 years it takes to get to a point where a secondary clause in those bylaws is triggered. And when that secondary clause is triggered, it allows the employees to buy us out. So if they say, hey, listen, this is like our home, this is our ancestral land, we've been here for generations, we appreciate, what you've done, but we want to be in control of our own destiny. They can buy us out, ain't nothing we can do about it. Now, we did have to add an additional clause because we had a Chinese competitor just pay the people to buy us out and then give it to them. And so then it came out of the community and then they fired all of the people and it was too late for them, right? So we had to add a right of first refusal into the bylaws where if they do that, they have to offer it back to us at the same price. And then we have, 60 days to purchase it and keep it in the Black community if that were to ever happen again. It hasn't been tried again. So that just goes to show you people will read your stuff and look for the loopholes, in your legal documents to try and get you, when you're doing things that benefit the community that they want to step in on. But that allows them to have autonomy over their own community. And if they want to take over, fine. It also allows them to have ownership in whatever it is that we're doing. So when the Chinese come in and try to compete with you, which they have a habit of losing money on purpose to kill out all competition, and then they make the thing more expensive than it ever was to begin with. And there's nothing you can do about it because now there's nobody else but them. So that typically worked. But now when the people own your company, they got ownership, they're getting shares every paycheck, they get more and more ownership. They're not cutting their own throat to go play with the Chinese because the Chinese, got half the price. They'll pay the bigger price because they're owners, and so that takes care of that as well. And so as long as you have that equilibrium where you're being fair and you're giving, self-determination, to the local people, you're respecting that balance, then you'll be all right. You can't lose. If you're being greedy, and you're not respecting the balance and you're trying to trample over people and it's your way or the highway, that's not going to work out for you. You're going to end up falling off.
So I like that. Despite everybody being from the continent and having a connection with the continent, it is important to respect those who that's been their land for generations,
Yeah.
And so even though you're coming in and you are a long lost brother or sister, it is important that you still maintain that. You know what I mean? Would you call it a hierarchy?
It's, you know what? I honestly call it a harmony because that's really what it is. Because
Right.
here's what happens, and there's actually studies on this. When your belly is touching your back, you're actually less intelligent because all you're focused on is surviving. All you're focused on is where's my next meal coming from. So that's another problem with throwing money at people who are maybe in a bad situation.
Yeah, right.
They can't really think of what to do with it. So what we did was we figured out that over that 5 years, if you lift someone out of poverty and now they're in a place where they're not struggling and they're not, hand to mouth, and their belly's not against their back anymore, and their eyes are open and they're full intelligence is engaged in the problem
Right.
solving of, you know what I mean? Now there's a harmony there. So it's very, very rare at this point that, you know, we're voted out of a company completely where, you know, because let's say like, for example, back to the t-shirt lady, if the t-shirts are going to Harlem and they're going to, you know, black centers, Atlanta and all of that, so they're black made on this side, and then we ship them to black companies in the United States, those, they put whatever on the shirts and then they sell them to whoever, right? But now the supply chain is really black owned, right? How do you get the supply chain without us? You know what I mean? So there's still a harmony there, but if you want to
Right.
control your own destiny, that's cool. You can take over the you know, the company. You can go do business with other people if you want. Go do business with the Chinese. Go do business, you know, whatever. It's your community. But at that point, there's no animosity,
Yeah.
because when you wanted to guide your own destiny, nobody stood in your way. There was actually a path made for you before you wanted it, that if you ever wanted it, you could. So ain't nobody like running us out of town just because they want to, you know, guide their own destiny in X, Y, and Z, right? And so it creates, it's almost like your kids. Like if your kids want to do something with their life, you know, and you're blocking them, the friction that happens, right? I want to be a lawyer. Boy, I said you're going to be a doctor. No, I want to be a lawyer. You're going to be a doctor. That friction, all of a sudden, that's crazy. But if they, hey, you know what? I want to be an engineer. I know you groomed me to be a lawyer. You want me to be a lawyer. You're a lawyer. You want me to follow in your footsteps, but I really want to be an engineer. And if you've already opened the path for them, like, that's cool. Why don't you go to this program, this undergrad program, see how you do with it? If you don't like it, switch to that undergrad program, see how you do with that. And then we'll come back, we'll make a decision. You let me know what you want to do, and we'll move forward from there. That friction that other, you know, father son pair or that other family pair had, that doesn't exist in the second scenario. In the second scenario, now that child has a chance to prove themselves and prove that this thing is better for them and the way that they want to do it is the way to do it. But within the guidelines of, you're still getting the education, you know, that I need you to get. You're still moving in the direction that I need you to move, right? And so we found that it just works better that way, and it becomes a harmony where it's like you can go do something else because now you got the capital, right? Because they didn't buy you out. It ain't like you gave it to them, right? So they bought you out. So you got your capital. You can go do something else. You know what I mean? Or now it ends up being like separate entities that are just working with each other, which is typically what we see, right? So like the t-shirt thing, that's a 100% Kenyan owned thing now, right? And it's up in Nairobi, and you know, if anybody wants t-shirts or whatever, we can make that happen for you. It's theirs, right? It's 100% theirs. But they still work with us in order to reach the U.S. market, you know, and get the blank t-shirts, or even if people want something on it, you know, to that U.S. market and the U.K. market and the Canadian market, you know. But typically the African zones within all of those markets. We even had some Afro Swedes that were actually doing these really dope like hip hop shirts, but they were getting their stock, you know, from Kenya instead of from China. Yeah.
Wow. Finally.
Yeah. And
Wow.
those are AGOA certified, so they come in into tariff exempt.
Wow. It feels so, it's such an honor to be a part of these movements, honestly. You know, because they always say it's nice to talk about the Pan-African, you know, dream, but it's important that we put it into fruition, you know, like have practical steps, you know. And, you know, the Diaspora Freedom Initiative is a partner with, you know, Pan-African Lifestyle, one that we are very, partnership we're very proud of. Can you share with us and the viewers some key initiatives you are working on with us at PAL here?
Yeah, definitely. So we're definitely trying to get manufacturing and production going on this side, and be able to offer that to your audience. We've been looking at clothing, you know, production and things of that nature. We've even been looking at gold production, right, and being able to work out like gold coins that are minted specifically for us as a method. And a lot of people are investing in gold and holding physical gold. and obviously being on the continent, we have direct access to mines and stuff like that.
Right,
And
right,
which
right.
mines are African owned versus which mines are European
Oh,
owned.
right.
so, so yeah, there's definitely some cool projects coming up. We're doing a community project, and that's in the pipeline, and that's going to be a full-on community. So houses, apartments, 2 business centers, a hospital, and a
Nice.
school. And a school, typically out here, international schools pick their curriculum. So you'll see things like international school British curriculum, international school French curriculum, international school, IB, which is that international baccalaureate, whatever. So we're looking at doing a Pan African system. And
Nice.
so that it's not like the British education system or the French or the American, which is what you typically see now anywhere there's international school, not just Africa. I lived in China for 2 years and they do the same thing there.
Wow.
But you rarely see like an African or a Pan African system where they're talking about like the Edo, and they're talking about the Kush and the bronze makers, and all of that stuff, and all of those kingdoms and the Moors and all of
Right,
those
right.
things that have happened here, and the Bantu and all of that. So
Hmm.
that part of the education doesn't typically make it where everywhere else, even though they have those international schools, and those international schools can use other educational programs, there's still an emphasis, at least on their own history at some point, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so in your top 5 schools in the world are all in Switzerland, but even one of those top 5 schools is the American school, right? And they use the American, educational platform, but here on the continent is really the only place where I see that very sparingly. There are a couple of places that do, but it's very sparingly, and those places are essentially experiments, which ours would be too. But we'd like to see it get to a place where it becomes the norm.
Yeah. That's, so you feel like these are, these partnerships are really helping to bridge that gap between
Yeah,
the diaspora and the continent, which is really, really important. And my
yeah,
next question
absolutely.
is, as the founder of BioPoc Investment Group, you're focusing on sustainable growth in East Africa. What do you think are the top emerging opportunities for investment on the continent right now?
Yeah, for sure. Green infrastructure. Um, we are looking at doing things called uh, battery reactors, mini battery reactors, and full size battery reactors, and so what they do is they actually purify water, right? So they can turn wastewater into drinkable water if you
Wow.
use the highest system, the system that's typically used just as a matter of cost efficiency, I suppose, is a system that creates more like a gray water, so you can use it for your car, you can use it for showering and all of that, but it's not completely purified to the point of drinking. But the next
Mm,
step up in a mini battery reactor, or a sequential battery reactor rather, is you can actually turn it into drinking water. Um,
wow.
Here, because we're on the equator, solar works really, really, really well. There are some promising types of tidal energy, and then here in Kenya, Kenya is about number 3 in the world in geothermal, which is something that is rarely ever talked about. So that green infrastructure with like solarized microgrids and stuff like that is huge. Um, there's also healthcare projects. Healthcare is always, there for the
Yeah.
investment. Agribusiness is definitely there, and ag tech. Ag tech is probably the real place where the most kind of change and development can be made. Um, Fintech and like mobile money initiatives also. Kenya, in my opinion, um, has the greatest trust for fintech on the continent, right? And so So to kind of put that into perspective, most Kenyans have their entire salary transferred to their phone. And most Kenyans have a significant amount of all of the money that they own in digital form on their phone, right? They trust it. There's never been a problem with it. It's never been hacked. It's, it's a pretty secure technology. And its security is actually in its rudimentary nature. So it's an analog technology. It's not digital. While, yes, you can get a smart app to access the technology, all you need is a USSD code to access the technology. So you can pull out any phone, a Nokia 5100 series from the 1990s, and, pound, 123, or star 123 pound, and it'll bring up the menu on that phone, and you can transmit money to anybody you want. So they have a pretty sophisticated system that's low tech. Which is outstanding. I actually wish that the technology would be licensed to the United States, because the problem in a lot of the hoods in the United States is there's no banks. So you got to go to a bodega on the street, and the bodega charge you 25% of your paycheck to cash a check out of the register. So it's expensive to be poor, right? So with that type of technology, I go out into the mountains right now and find a woman who got potatoes from her farm sitting on a table. Go up there and pay for the potatoes with my phone. She pull out a little tiny, what we affectionately refer to as an Obama phone in the United States. Little phone is not smart at all, right? And she'll pull out that little phone, collect her money. It's a done deal, right? We're good to go, and we're off. So this is really the only country. I mean, while we were transferring money back and forth through cell phones and putting our entire paychecks on cell phones every time we got paid out here, ATMs were not giving people the money in their bank accounts in Nigeria. You know what I mean? So, like, the population of Nigeria don't trust digital money the same way the population of Kenya trusts digital money, right? And so, even there was a coin that was created on a blockchain that Akon was pushing back, in the whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I remember that.
Kenya's the only place you can use it. It's the only place where it's live. Acoin doesn't exist anywhere else, right? So in this environment where they trust digital money and digital wallets and all of that, this is where mobile fintech would explode. No other country on this continent trusts digital to the point where they just put all their money in the phone, and it doesn't matter if your phone gets stolen with your money in it. Within 10 minutes, your money is back in your hand. Now you might have to buy a new phone. That part you might have a problem with, but you walk up, they're called M-Pesa agents. They're on every corner. They're everywhere, right? You walk up to an M-Pesa agent, you pay 100 shillings, which is less than $1. Boom, you got a replacement SIM card, all your money's safe, right? So, and even if you wait, you wait a year, unless the person figures out your PIN, your money's still safe, because the PIN has to be punched in for every single transaction, right? So, unless that person knows your PIN, even if they have your phone, they can't get at your money. And, as soon as you realize your phone is missing, you can just go to any agent, like I said, and just get that taken care of, and you're good to go. So it's one of these situations where it's just kind of a perfect solution. Everybody trusts it. Everybody's cool with it. And so that opens up the door for people who are pushing fintech solutions that maybe get shot down in the US and shot down, in the UK and all of that. These things could be embraced here because everybody already trusts, fintech. So, like, even when our relocation clients through the immigration law firm come through, we tell them to carry $100 in their pocket. And they're always like, what? We're like, no, you download an app called SendWave, get that set up. It's just like in America, we have Zelle. It's just like Zelle. It's your debit card from your bank account in America in the app, same thing. And you get that set up. They're going to validate you and verify you. They might have you hold up an ID or something and take a picture, those verification systems. They're going to verify you. And then that's it. And when you get here, you'll get a phone, and then you can send yourself up to $10,000 a month directly from your bank account to your cell phone through that SendWave, and it's an instant transfer. You press the button, boom, it's in your phone immediately. And that's it. So you don't need to carry a bunch of cash. You have
Right.
$100 to take care of anything. You want some food in the airport, you want some whatever, you know. If you lose it, not that big of a deal, you know what I mean? Versus trying to walk with $9 in your pocket. Somebody, you know, bumps into you and all of a sudden you ain't got $9 anymore, you know. The way we used to do it in the old days. Money belts and stuff, you know. So you don't have to do that out here. You get the SendWave in advance. It's all set up. You're verified and all of that, you know. And then when you get here, you get a local number, and the money is sent from phone number to phone number, from SendWave to phone number, and that's it. So yeah, real simple to make the fintech and the money stuff work. So yeah, that's it. I would say green infrastructure, healthcare projects, ag tech, and fintech. I would say those are probably your biggest growth opportunities.
Amazing. And what do you think, Pan-Africanism, what role does that play in your work?
Yeah, so for me, the supply chain, it means everything, right? Supply chains weather the storm, right? So right now, most of the supply chains that Black communities in the West deal with are European supply chains. When Europeans decide we're not using that supply chain anymore, that's it. You're just screwed, right?
Mm,
But when it's our supply chain and we run that supply chain, number one, we control not only where our dollars go, but typically where our tax dollars go, right? I have business clients that, have businesses out here. They get to pick whether they pay taxes to an African country or whether they pay
wow.
taxes to America. If they choose to pay taxes to the African country, they can deduct that tax payment from any taxes they owe in America, right?
Wow.
So they have an option of, do I pay for the next bomb that Trump might drop on the next country, or do I pay for the infrastructure of Kenya instead?
Right.
And so and other people do that all the time, right? There are people who choose to fund Israel instead of funding the United States because they have the ability to pay taxes in one place instead of the other.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
in
yeah.
Chinatown. They choose whether are we going to fund Shenzhen and Hong Kong, or are we going to fund DC, because they can choose to pay taxes in one over the other. We never
Wow.
get that choice because we don't implement these types of strategies
Yeah,
where we can
yeah,
now choose, like,
yeah.
okay, I'm going to support this regime over this regime with my tax dollars.
Wow, wow. I really love that. I really love that. It gives us an option and helps us to actually have practical steps in rebuilding our homeland. You know what I mean? So we gain some respect I want to say, on the world stage. So this is genius thinking. It's been a pleasure, my brother. Honestly, you have left me and I'm sure the pals with so much to think about. You're a brother with extensive amount of knowledge on what you do and what you're doing for the continent. And truly, you are a trailblazer, putting hands on. And yeah, like I said, the things you've mentioned today is stuff that I've never thought of before. Well, I actually, like I said, I did come across the Malcolm X video and the Dr. Umar mentioning that, but I've never actually had a practical way of going about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or what ways can you go about it? And something as simple as paying taxes back home is, you know what I mean? It's right there in front of us, and we could be doing that. Of course, like you said, the trust fund also is a major way to build that generational wealth, and of course, as well, the protection that is on that generational wealth is a massive thing that it cannot just be put away. And then, of course, also inspiring us to be not to be short-sighted, you know what I mean? And to make a decision that, yes, you may not feel some of the wealth, but it's high time that your kids and Black kids in the future are
Right.
like white kids, where they got that, fall back that's there and it's resting there, that kind of way. And
Yeah.
they're born with a silver spoon. So it's like, here we are having ideas and they're actually being, brothers like yourself are carrying them out. So, man, on behalf of the pals, thank you so much. Before you leave, though, I really want to ask you a question we ask everybody on the show. How do you personally define the African dream?
Well, I feel like that the African dream for me. All right. So my personal definition of the African dream is self-determination that uplifts all Black folks. Right.
Mm,
When we're able to put ourselves in a position where we own supply chains, we own the means of production, we own the resources, and then we're great stewards of that, right? Because we can
Right.
grab those things and act just like the Europeans do, right? But when we're great stewards of that and we cultivate that, and we become disciplined and regimented, it uplifts everyone, right? And so Chinese people ain't no better at math than anybody else,
There you
but
go.
everybody thinks they are, because they're disciplined and they're regimented and they make sure that their kids understand engineering and they make sure that their kids play an instrument, which is mathematics, and they make sure that their kids understand these things and they sacrifice for it, and they're disciplined about it, and it becomes part of the culture where now the culture is competing. You hear Asian parents get together and talk, and they're talking about the GPAs of their kids in the Ivy League schools, and that's what they're competing about. You're not competing about I got the Jordan 11s and they're not competing about that, and they're not necessarily rich, but they've created a situation where their discipline uplifts the entire culture. The entire culture now competes on a level of excellence, and they do it on a generational level. They compete about the next generation. They don't
Right.
brag about what they think they've done, right? And so
Right.
these things happen. We see it with Nigerians all the time, where with certain tribes anyway, where they really are focused on education. The tribe that Barack Obama comes from here in Kenya, same thing. You meet somebody from that tribe, and 9 times out of 10, they got a doctorate, right? And
Right.
they're focused on it. And they introduce people to this. This is Dr. So-and-so, and he's a doctor in pharmacology. This is Dr. So-and-so, and he's a doctor, in geopolitical studies, and that's how they operate, right? And so their entire culture is uplifted by that discipline, and that sacrifice that they've made individually. And so for me, that's what the African dream is about. It's about being able to do something in a place that actually uplifts your entire culture versus being in a place where you're systematically wiped out if you start uplifting your culture, right? And so that's really what it was for me. That's what I wanted from my kids. I have one son, and when I left Philly, the stats were horrendous. It was something like every 38 minutes a child was shot. You know what I mean? Like, not just a murder happened. And I was like, there's no way that I could be in a place where
Right.
this is how many children are dying versus how many people are just dying. Here's the child statistics, and I remember it was the week before I left permanently, a group of kids beat a homeless man to death. I'm sure it'll pop up on YouTube if you search it. And it was a little girl that hit the man with the trash can or something and beat him, the death blow. It was a little girl, on the street at like 3 a.m. And the day before that, 20 kids showed up, and we got this little mini market, convenience market called a Wawa. Right, it's like a little sandwich shop, gas station. Like 20 kids came up, destroyed the whole thing, stole everything. The police are standing outside watching them do it, and they just walked off. And I'm like, I'm gonna have a kid in
Right.
this place here, And so I didn't have any children yet, and I was just like, this is not, I'm not doing it. Either I'm not, if I stay here, I'm not doing it, or it's time to make a move. And so, we moved here, and not for nothing, we moved here and we had an issue with the delivery. We had an issue with the pregnancy. And so now we were going to have to deliver premature. And in America, and I actually called back, I called back to my doctor in Philly. I was like, listen, this is what's going on. What would you do? And they were like, all right, we would start steroids to make sure that the baby has lungs, but it's going to take, I think it was 48 hours of steroid treatment. You're going to want to do, this antibiotic and this, and that. And it was like 5 or 6 different IV regimens over 48 hours that he would have done back home, you know, or back in the U.S. To make sure that this baby was delivered okay.
Safely.
We ended up not doing none of that. Here, they came in, they got the amniotic fluid. I'd never even heard this before. In the amniotic fluid, there are mom stem cells and baby stem cells. I didn't know that. I'd never heard that in my life, right? And I'm pretty up on this type of stuff. But in amniotic fluid, there are special stem cells that are babies and moms. And so they went in, they got the stem cells. They ended up seeing what the baby reacted to, what the baby stem cells reacted to versus what mom stem cells reacted to. They did a 12-hour treatment, grew the baby's lungs completely, went in and had the emergency delivery. The baby didn't even go to the NICU. Baby was good. Baby's still good. There's no asthma. There's no nothing. In America, there's like a 90% chance when that premature baby you got asthma because the lungs aren't fully developed. I was like, wait a minute. I called the doctor back and he was like, give me the information. And I've never even heard of this. So the doctor in Kenya has now hooked up with the doctor from Philly and like, you know, they're swapping information. But they literally went in there and did like genetic analysis and grew my baby lungs. You know, like it was crazy. And so I'm not even sure my baby would have lived had we had the exact same thing happen in America. So, you know, it's wild. You think like Africa is backwards or they're lower technology or they're lower whatever.
Come on, man.
Oh, brother.
Come on, man.
So that's it. To me, that's the dream. People that understand, you know what it was? That woman, the woman who delivered the baby, she still sees the baby to this day. She looked at our situation and she saw herself. It wasn't
so important,
what I
right?
would have got at the naval yard in Philly, you know, which is where we would go, you know. It wasn't that because they looked at us and they didn't see themselves. So she figured out the best possible way to do what needed to be done, and the outcome was incredible. There's absolutely no difference. There's no developmental delays. There's no nothing. It's crazy how well it worked.
Wow.
So there's that. How about that? That's the dream. That's the dream. People love you the way they love themselves.
I thank you for speaking so well of Africa also. No, honestly, that's something let me just put it there. Thank you for speaking so well of Africa. Even going there, it's important that people hear the positives about it. And again, John, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're so excited to be following your work with Diaspora Freedom Initiative and BIPOC investment as they build generational man and wealth and empower future leaders. So, brother, thank you so much. And to our pals, thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you can get many, many more episodes like this one, where you get to listen to wise and informative men like John here. So thank you so much for watching, John. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you, my man.
God bless you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please, please, please keep the conversation alive. We want to hear your voice. Let us know what part of today's conversation sparked new thinking, new pride, and new action. I've been your host, Harrison Paul. Thank you so much.
Are you planning to travel, relocate, or invest in Africa? Before making permanent decisions, equip yourself with the knowledge you need to make informed choices. Africa 101 is your guide to relocating, investing, and living in Africa. This is your essential resource, covering the basics and must-know insights to guide you confidently. Download your guide now at panafricanlifestyle.com and take the first step toward a thriving future in the motherland.